Everyone. My name is Dave Emmy, and it's an honor for me to be here at the Darby Free Library, the longest continually run library in the history of America. It started in, I think, 1742, I believe. 43, okay, close enough. And coincidentally, the book that I'm going to be talking about tonight has a nexus right with this property in this area. So it's fun for me to be just in this environment, and thanks so much to Susan Borders for helping me out here to present. It's great to be here, and I'm just going to cut to the chase here. Also being Black History Month, the story of my book, which is titled Black Slave, White Queen, and Colors Between, Discovering America's First Black Portrait Artist, is very relevant to today with being Black History Month. And let me tell you how I started out on this journey. I didn't really intend to write this book. I was in a bookstore on the main line, and I came across this old historical text, Watson's History of Pennsylvania. And it had a speech by a guy by the name of Charles Janeway Stilley, who was the president of the University of Pennsylvania. And Charles Janeway Stilley was talking about this portrait of Sweden's Queen Christina. And the speech was in 1876 for the centennial celebration of the United States, which took place here in Philadelphia. And in 1876, Philadelphia was the cultural epicenter of America because of this 100-year celebration. And all of the European countries, the Italians, the Polish, the English, all came here to wave their flag to say, listen, we had something to do with America too. And the Swedes came here and did the same thing, because the area that we live in right now was once called New Sweden. The Swedes had settled here before William Penn was even born. That's why you have Swedesboro, New Jersey, and Swedesford Road. If you go down the street here, you'll see Johan Prince's mill. Johan Prince was the governor of New Sweden. So this speech in 1876, done by Charles Janeway Stilley, was a kind of a rah-rah, Swedes are, had something to do with America too, and here's the portrait of Queen Christina that we're going to present. And Queen Christina was the reigning monarch of Sweden at the time the New Sweden colony started. So when I saw that, I thought, well, where is this portrait? Because my mother was Swedish, and I know a lot of the Swedish cultural centers around here. So I thought, where is this portrait? And I called around, and I found it at the Philadelphia History Museum. So they let me go see it. It was in storage. It's kind of broken right now. It needs refurbishing. But when I saw it, I also came across these other portraits. One of this gentleman, Stephen Smith, and the other of his wife, Harriet Lee Smith. And the Philadelphia History Museum identified the artist as a James Stidun, S-T-I-D-U-N. And I kind of recognized that name a little bit, and I asked to see the documentation that was presented when these portraits came to the museum. And what I found out was that the portrait artist's name was really James Stidham, S-T-I-D-U-M. They had just made a mistake at the museum, mistaking an N for an M. And when I saw the name Stidham, I knew that was a New Sweden colonist. The Stidham family was one of the families that settled in New Sweden. So that's kind of the nexus between Queen Christina, the monarch of Sweden when the New Sweden colony started, and the person who painted this portrait, this James Stidham, who was an ancestor of the Swedish colonist Timon Stidham. And James Stidham was biracial. He was black. His mother was a black slave, and his father was a white slave owner by the name of Henry Stidham. So it was a little, I'm looking for a Swede, I'm not looking for someone who's black, So when I saw, wow, James Stidham, I pieced it together and I did some further research on it. So that's really kind of the story behind the book, is who this James Stidham was, and then the portraits that he painted of Stephen Smith and his wife, Harriet Lee Smith. fan over here. Anyway, referring to this map here, I sketched a little map before we started about where Stephen Smith was from and where James Stidham is. Not too many people know about James Stidham. He's just a name that appears who painted these portraits. Well, I've estimated that these portraits were done in 1830. And in 1830, it was illegal to teach blacks how to read and write, particularly in slave states like Maryland. For a black man to get the ability to portrait paint is really an astounding thing, because back then portrait painting was a very unique skill. People didn't have palettes of colors and portraits and frames to work at. That a black man was able to get these unique items and acquire the skill is a very exceptional story. And the Stidham family, being Swedish, also was related to this other family called the Heseliuses. And the Heseliuses were portrait painters. They were the first portrait painters in this area. One of the Heseliuses painted George Washington when he was here in Philadelphia. So in my book, I talk about who James Stidham was and how he acquired this skill of portrait painting. And there really almost is no other explanation, because these were the only portrait painters in the area were Swedes. And the fact that he has a Swedish surname it's just such a unique skill, and the Swedes were the only people who had it. So really, James Stidham almost had to have been trained by a Swedish portrait artist, or someone that a Swedish portrait artist trained taught James Stidham. But regardless, he's of Swedish ancestry, and he was also a portrait artist. And that's kind of the crux of the book. But the other interesting parts of it, there's the story of Queen Christina. I talk about what she did in Europe. But coming back here to Black History Month, Stephen Smith, the person who was painted, and his wife Harriet Lee Smith, are probably the heroes of the book. Stephen Smith, he's not buried far from here, just down the road in Eden Cemetery. He was the richest black man in America during the 19th century. He was born here in Maryland, just over the border. This is a sketch of the area. He was born in Cecil County, Maryland, right here, on the edge of the Sassafras River. And he was born into slavery. He also was biracial. His father was a white slave master. His mother was a black female slave. And at the age of 5 years old, Stephen Smith is brought to Pennsylvania, and he's sold to a guy by the name of General Bow, who was a Revolutionary War hero with George Washington. And at 5 years old, this was when slaves started to work. And General Bow seems to be really affiliated with the Quakers and abolition movements. And it looks like General Bow really, quote, purchases Stephen Smith to get him out of a life of slavery in Maryland. It's what it appears to be. But Stephen Smith was here on the north side of the Sassafras River, and this James Stidham, the black portrait artist who the Philadelphia Museum didn't know anything about, he lived on the south side of the Sassafras River, number 2, where I have. What it looked like here on the south side of the Sassafras River was a little community of biracial people who were the sons and daughters of white plantation owners who lived here in Cecil County and their black female slaves. During my research, what I discovered was the incidences of biracial unions was enormous. There was an entire class of biracial people in northern Maryland, southeastern Pennsylvania, that was kind of under the radar. At times, these biracial people were part of families. They were endeared. They were a member of the white family. At other times, they were sold off. They were things that a white plantation woman didn't want to see the offspring of an illegitimate child running around on a plantation. She'd be saying, hey, let's sell these kids off. So there's a writer, his name is David Remnick, who is now the editor of the New Yorker. he's a sound writer, and he wrote a biography of the Obamas.